Welcome in, everyone. Today we're diving into a topic I know you're interested in because you sent in this article, Why Black Voices Matter in Global Politics. So we're going to take a deep dive into this and really explore, what it's saying.
It's such a fascinating article. You know what I think is really interesting about it is that it really pushes us to go beyond just having representation in politics. It's not just about we need a certain number of Black politicians. It's more about understanding the unique experiences that Black voices bring to the table and how those experiences can actually shape policy and really, make a difference in communities.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. The article goes way back in history to help us understand the roots of Black political engagement. What can you tell us about that? What do we need to know?
Well, I think the first thing is just acknowledging the impact of the transatlantic slave trade, and how that led to centuries of systemic disenfranchisement for Black communities. And that historical context is so important because it helps us understand the foundation of the challenges that Black voices are still grappling with today.
Right, so understanding the backstory helps us see the full picture of where things stand now. And the article talks about some pretty significant turning points, like the Reconstruction era following the Civil War. Wasn't that a time of real progress?
Absolutely, it was. For a short time, there was incredible progress. You had Black Americans gaining the right to vote, the right to hold office. It was a real moment of hope and possibility.
But then things took a turn, didn't they? With the Jim Crow era?
Yeah.
What happened there?
Unfortunately, there was a backlash. Jim Crow laws came in, and those were, specifically designed to take away those hard-won rights, to reinforce segregation and discrimination. And what's striking is that some of those tactics that were used to suppress voting rights back then are still having an echo today. They're hindering political participation in maybe more subtle ways.
Wow, that's really powerful. It's like history is not just in the past, it's shaping things right now as we speak. But even amidst these struggles, the article talks about how Black voices always rose up, always fighting for change.
Always. That's right.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Absolutely. Think about the NAACP. Emerging in the early 20th century, they played such a vital role in advocating for civil rights and challenging those discriminatory laws through the court system.
Right, and those legal battles that they fought. They're critical. They really paved the way for that Brown v. Board of Education decision, the one that desegregated public schools.
Exactly. The NAACP's advocacy was absolutely key to achieving that landmark victory in 1954. It really started to chip away at the foundation of segregation. Although, as we know, the fight for true equality in education continues.
It does. And, of course, we have the civil rights movement in the 1960s. With such powerful figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X leading the charge.
The movement was a turning point, for sure. It brought the issue of racial justice to the forefront of American consciousness. And it really inspired similar movements around the world.
And it feels like that's a bridge to where we are now. The article talks about how the fight for Black political representation continues today.
Yeah.
Even with milestones like President Obama.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's so important to remember. Even with all of these advancements that we've seen, these systemic barriers are still there. And they manifest in different ways.
Okay, so let's dive into that a little bit. The article brings up systemic racism as a major obstacle. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. Systemic racism is really about understanding that it goes beyond just individual acts of prejudice. It's embedded in the structures of our society itself, in our institutions, our policies, even our cultural norms. It creates this uneven playing field where Black individuals and communities are constantly facing disadvantages.
So it's not just about one bad apple.
Yeah.
It's like the whole system is tilted.
That's right.
In a way that disadvantages Black people, even if no one's intentionally doing it.
Exactly. And that's why it's so hard to dismantle. And the article gives some really good examples, like underrepresentation in decision-making roles.
Right.
Even today, Black individuals are significantly underrepresented in government, in corporate boards, and all these positions of power.
And that lack of representation really has this ripple effect, right? It impacts whose voices are heard, whose interests are prioritized.
Yeah.
When decisions are being made about policies.
Exactly. And it's not just about optics. It's about the actual outcomes. And that's why the article really dives into diverse perspectives and why they're so important.
What's your take on that? Why are those diverse voices at the table so important?
Well, I think about it like this. When you have people from different backgrounds, different experiences involved in making decisions, It leads to policies that are more inclusive and equitable. Black leaders. They bring their lived experiences to the table. They understand the challenges that their communities are facing firsthand.
Right.
And that leads to solutions that are more nuanced and effective.
And the article gives some really good examples from education, from healthcare, from criminal justice, to really illustrate this point of how policies can have vastly different effects on different groups of people.
Absolutely. Think about something like criminal justice reform. We know that mass incarceration has disproportionately impacted Black communities. So having Black voices at the table when these issues are being discussed ensures that those disparities are addressed and that the reforms that are being put in place actually lead to a system that's fairer.
So it's not just about representation to check a box. It's about having those voices there to come up with solutions that actually work.
That's right.
For everyone.
It is. And it's also about inspiration. The article talks about the power of seeing someone who looks like you in a position of power. What do you think about that? How does that impact young people?
I think it's so powerful. It sends a message that anything is possible. It's about shattering those glass ceilings and showing young Black people that they too can aspire to leadership roles and make a real difference.
Absolutely. It can spark a whole new wave of political engagement. It shows what's possible and encourages future generations to step up and lead.
And this is not just a national phenomenon. This article highlights the global impact of Black political activism. And it makes me think about the Black Lives Matter movement as a really powerful example.
The Black Lives Matter movement is such a good example. It originated here in the U.S., but it sparked conversations and protests literally worldwide. It raised global awareness about racial injustice and police brutality in a way that I think we haven't seen before.
It's true. And the article brings up a very specific case study, the End SARS movement in Nigeria. Can you tell us more about that one?
Yes. In 2020, this movement emerged, protesting police brutality by a special unit in Nigeria called SARS. And it's remarkable how they use social media to organize these protests and demand accountability from the government. It really showed the power of digital tools to amplify their message and connect with people across the globe.
It's like we're seeing this really powerful intersection of technology and activism.
Okay.
And it seems like it's especially impactful for Black communities.
It really is. And I think that leads us to another really important concept that the article talks about: intersectionality. What are your initial thoughts on that?
To be honest, it's a term I've heard, but I don't know that I fully grasp it.
Okay, well, think of it as a framework for understanding how all these different aspects of a person's identity, their race, their gender, their class, their sexuality, their religion, all of these things overlap and interact to shape their experiences. And it reminds us that Black individuals don't represent a monolithic group. Their lived realities are shaped by these multiple intersecting factors.
Okay, so it's not just about saying Black voices. It's about recognizing that there's so much diversity within those voices.
Exactly. And it helps us understand how different forms of oppression can actually intersect. The article gives a good example comparing the experiences of a Black woman to those of a Black man. While they both might face racism, a Black woman might also face sexism and discrimination based on her gender.
That makes me think about how crucial it is to move beyond one-size-fits-all solutions. We need policies that address those very specific challenges and acknowledge how complex people's lives really are.
It's about going deeper. True equality requires tackling all forms of oppression, not just one.
Right, and that's where having those diverse voices at the table is so essential.
Yeah.
It's not just about numbers. It's about the quality and the depth of the perspectives that are being represented.
Absolutely. It's about making sure that the solutions that we're creating actually address the root causes of injustice and create a world that is truly equitable for everyone.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges, the historical context, this idea of intersectionality. But the article also highlights some really inspiring success stories. Black politicians who've made a global impact. And I'm eager to hear more about them.
Yeah, let's dive into those. The article focuses on 3 key figures: Nelson Mandela, Barack Obama, and Kamala Harris. And their journeys offer some incredible lessons about leadership, resilience, and the pursuit of justice.
Okay. Well, I think that's a great place to pick up in part 2.
Welcome back. Ready to dig into those inspiring figures?
Absolutely. I'm ready. Where should we start?
Let's start with Nelson Mandela. I mean, his journey from political prisoner to becoming South Africa's first Black president. It's pretty remarkable.
It's incredible. 27 years in prison for fighting against apartheid. And then he leads the transition to a multiracial democracy. It's hard to even imagine.
It is. And what's really amazing about Mandela is that he didn't just focus on dismantling apartheid. He was also really focused on reconciliation and nation building.
Yeah.
He understood that to really move forward, you have to heal those dent wounds of the past.
Yeah. He's such a powerful example of leadership and forgiveness. And it makes you think about how those qualities are so essential when you're trying to create lasting change, especially when you're dealing with such a painful history.
Right. And Mandela's impact went way beyond South Africa. I mean, he became a global symbol of hope and inspiration for people who were fighting for freedom and equality all over the world.
That's so true. It's amazing how one person's courage can have such a ripple effect. And speaking of inspiring figures, the article also talks about President Obama.
Yes, Obama's election as the first African-American president
Yeah.
of the United States, that was a monumental moment. It was a testament to how far we'd come as a nation, but it also really highlighted how much further we still had to go.
I remember watching his inauguration and feeling the sense of hope and possibility. Like maybe things were really starting to change for the better.
Yeah, and his presidency wasn't without challenges, of course, but it definitely showed the power of representation. To have someone who looked like so many Americans occupying the highest office in the land, it sent a powerful message about what's possible.
Right. And the article points to his healthcare reform, the Affordable Care Act. It's a really concrete example of how his policies aim to create a more equitable society.
Yes. The Affordable Care Act, it had its complexities, but it was a significant step towards expanding access to health care for millions of Americans, particularly those from marginalized communities.
It shows how policy can really directly impact people's lives. And then, of course, the article also highlights Kamala Harris, the first female vice president of the United States.
And not just the first female VP, but also the first Black and South Asian American woman. To hold that position, it was another historic moment for representation and inclusion.
It is. It's incredible to think about the progress that's been made, but also how much further we still have to go.
Yeah, absolutely. These success stories are so inspiring, but they're not the end of the story. The work continues.
Okay, so we've talked about these amazing individuals, but what about the role of international institutions in empowering Black voices? The article talks about that as well.
Yeah, that's a really crucial piece of the puzzle. Organizations like the United Nations and the African Union, they're becoming more aware of the importance of diversity and inclusion in global decision-making.
The article mentions the UN's People of African Descent program. Can you tell us more about what that is?
Sure. It's a program that's specifically focused on addressing the challenges that are faced by Black communities all around the world. It's about promoting racial equality and advocating for the rights of people of African descent on that international stage.
So it's a step in the right direction to have these global organizations,
Yeah,
recognizing the need for greater inclusion.
it is. And the African Union also has its own charter on human and people's rights, which highlights that commitment to protecting the rights of all individuals, regardless of their race or background.
So there are mechanisms in place to address these issues on a global level. But is that enough? What does the article say about that?
That's the question, right? While these institutions are taking some steps, the article really argues that we need to go further. It suggests strengthening partnerships with those grassroots organizations that are working directly with Black communities on the ground.
Right, because those grassroots groups,
Yeah,
they're on the front lines. They really have those insights and experiences.
absolutely. International institutions need to move beyond just talking about inclusion and really engage with those communities in a meaningful way. Listen to the people they're trying to serve.
So building those bridges between the global institutions and the people on the ground.
Exactly.
And what about mentorship? The article mentioned that as well.
Mentorship is so important. It's about investing in that next generation of Black leaders and giving them the support and guidance they need to succeed.
Right, it's like passing the torch,
Yeah.
creating those pathways for young Black leaders to step into those roles and make a difference.
Exactly. Connecting those aspiring Black politicians with more experienced leaders can provide invaluable insights and networking opportunities support as they're navigating these complex systems.
Okay, so we've explored the historical context,
Yeah.
the challenges, the inspiring figures, the role of international institutions, but the article also talks about strategies for moving forward. Like, what can we actually do to make a difference? What are some of the key takeaways there?
Well, it really breaks it down into a few areas: community engagement, policy reform, coalition building, and education and mentorship. So let's start with community engagement. Why do you think that's so important?
Well, it seems pretty fundamental. If you want to empower Black communities, you have to make sure that they're actively participating. in the political process,
Yeah.
not just being talked about.
It's about empowering those communities to identify their own needs and priorities and work together to achieve them. The article talks about things like town hall meetings. It's a classic example. A chance for people to directly engage with their elected officials, voice their concerns, and hold them accountable.
But beyond those traditional formats, there's so much potential for innovation, right? Especially with technology.
Absolutely. Think about online forums, social media campaigns, digital storytelling. All of these tools can help to amplify those voices, connect people across geographical boundaries, and create spaces where diverse perspectives can be shared and solutions can be developed collaboratively.
Yeah, it's exciting to see how technology can be used to kind of democratize
Yeah,
the political process and give more people a seat at the table.
it really can. But
Right.
community engagement is only one piece. We also have to think about policy reform.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What kind of policy changes are we talking about here?
Well, it starts with addressing some of those systemic barriers that we talked about earlier. Things like voting rights campaign finance and district redistricting. These are all areas where policy can either hinder or empower. Black political participation.
So making sure that voting is accessible to everyone, regardless of their race or their socioeconomic status.
Exactly. That means tackling things like voter ID laws, which have been shown to disproportionately disenfranchise Black voters, and making sure that polling places are conveniently located and accessible to everyone.
And on the campaign finance side, it seems like reducing the influence of money in politics could really help to level the playing field.
It's a complex issue, but the article suggests exploring policies. That would reduce the impact of big money on elections. That could be a real game changer. It would create more opportunities for Black candidates to run for office and compete fairly.
And then there's district redistricting. That one's a little bit harder to wrap my head around. Can you explain that?
Sure, think of it like this. Imagine a city with a large Black population. Gerrymandering, which is the manipulation of voting district boundaries, can be used to divide that population and spread them across multiple districts.
So instead of having enough votes to elect a representative of their choice, their voting powers is diluted.
Exactly. And that's why advocating for fair and transparent redistricting processes is so important. It's about ensuring that Black communities have a fair chance to elect representatives who truly reflect their interests and their concerns.
So making sure that the system is fair, that the game is being played on a level playing field.
Exactly. And alongside policy reform, the article emphasizes the power of coalition building. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it seems like when you have different marginalized groups coming together, their collective voice becomes that much stronger. It's about recognizing that so many of these challenges are interconnected.
That's the heart of intersectionality.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Understanding how these different systems of oppression intersect and work together.
Exactly.
So Black communities might find common ground and work together with groups advocating for women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights, economic justice, all of these different movements.
Absolutely. Those alliances can create a really powerful united front for change. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together and we're stronger when we stand together.
And that brings us to the final point that the article makes, the importance of education and mentorship. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but it seems like investing in the next generation of Black leaders is absolutely essential.
It is. It's about planting the seeds for long-term change. Supporting mentorship programs that connect those aspiring Black politicians with experienced leaders who can provide guidance, support, networking opportunities.
To make sure that those voices continue to be heard and amplified for generations to come.
Exactly. And education goes beyond those formal programs as well. It's about creating a society where everyone is aware of the history of racial injustice, the ongoing challenges, and the importance of Black political engagement.
It's about having those sometimes uncomfortable conversations, challenging our own biases and working together to create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
And that brings us back to you, the listener. The article that you shared ends with this really thought-provoking question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. What new possibilities do you see for amplifying Black voices in the global political landscape?
What stands out to you from everything we've discussed?
What resonates with you the most?
Yeah, it really is inspiring to think about all the different ways
Yeah.
that we can contribute to creating a world where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Yeah.
A more inclusive, equitable world.
Absolutely. And it really starts with awareness,
Yeah.
being engaged and finding those ways that we can each make a difference.
Right. We've talked about so much today, the history of Black political engagement, those inspiring stories, strategies for making change. It's been a lot to take in.
It has. And as we wrap up, I'm really curious, what were some of those key takeaways that really resonated with you?
Yeah. What really sparked your thinking? Was there a particular moment in history or a challenge,
Mm.
a success story or a strategy that really stood out?
Or even beyond those specific points, what are your unique skills and talents and resources that you can bring to the table?
Right. Maybe you're a writer who can tell these stories in a really compelling way. Or maybe you're a social media whiz who can amplify those voices online.
Or maybe you're a great organizer, someone who can really mobilize your community.
Or maybe you're just really good at listening and having those tough conversations. That can change people's minds.
Whatever your strengths are, there's definitely a space for you to get involved in this fight for justice and equality.
The article you sent in had this really powerful line. The intersection of technology and activism has created this new era of political engagement, empowering voices that haven't always been heard. So what new possibilities do you see emerging at this intersection of technology and activism?
How can we use technology to amplify Black voices to connect communities, to really mobilize people for change?
It's an exciting time. There's so much potential.
And it's up to all of us to use that potential to create a better future for everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep engaging with these important issues.